What makes employees the weakest link in your organization? Of course, we know nowadays that many employees are working from home, and we're seeing a lot more breaches that are happening to corporate networks. So let's take a look. How to mitigate your weakest link, which of course are all the users in your organization. Dimension Data just came out and they said that insider breaches increased 55% just since the pandemic came out. So that is a lot. And that insider breaches, that means that those are your employees. But it's not necessarily your employees that are doing the breaches, although in many cases they are. What's happening is they're getting their computer owned and then they're hacking into the network from there. And one of the reasons for this is because security has really been based on protecting the inside office, the local area network, and any VLANs that might be inside the network. There's usually only been a handful of users that have been able to work remotely in many organizations up until now. Now we see that the majority, if not all of our users, are remoting in, and that's causing a huge strain on the IT department. And many times it's just because things aren't set up correctly. Many companies are also allowing bring your own device because they just weren't ready for the amount of people that were going to be working from home. So they said, well, we don't have enough computers for everybody, so just use your own computer. That's a huge mistake. That should be rectified right away. If your company has done this, make plans for purchasing replacement computers for them today, because you don't know what's already on their computer. You don't know if it's already been infected, which many times they are. You don't know what applications are installed on there that could cause security issues. Same thing with phones and tablets. You don't know what's on there. Many organizations allow bring your own phones and tablets. Now, the good thing is about that is if you're in a Microsoft network, you can install Intune. And if you configure it correctly, you can separate the personal data from the corporate data on your devices, such as tablets and phones. But as far as your Windows 10 computers go, it doesn't work quite so easily. You're going to need to give them a company PC or some sort of a company device that is already hardened and works. Users are vulnerable to phishing and social engineering. And it's, how many times have we sent off a test email just to see how many people in our organization click on it to see if they're going to click on something that could have compromised their computer. And every time you send off a batch of these, there's at least a handful of people that click on it. Well, it only takes one. I've seen organizations that have called me after the fact where one computer user brought down an entire network because they got infected, and that infection spread across the network. So if you're using VPN, that's a real quick way to have that happen. But there's other options besides VPN, or there are some additional things that you can do besides VPN to protect you and your network. Now, 95% of all Fortune 500 companies are using Microsoft in their organization in using Active Directory. So I'm going to address Microsoft because it is going to be the majority of what we see out there. I realize there are some people using Macintosh as well as Linux. I realize that there are some organizations that are using a lot of Macs and a lot of Linux, but there's still going to be some Microsoft in your organization most likely. So the first thing you want to do is use multi-factor authentication. This is really easy to turn on in Office. You can go to office.com, click on the admin portal, and you can go in and just check a box. That's all you got to do. And then what it'll do is it will prompt the user the first time they go to log in to give information about their phone. So they can have a text sent to them. They can have an application that they can install and use it that way. But what it does is it sends a special code. They have to enter that code before they're allowed into their email. So that's a really great way to protect your email by using multi-factor authentication. As I mentioned, just go to office.com. You can go to portal.office.com. Either one of those, that will work, and they'll send that code to the user's phone. You can also use another product called Duo from Cisco. And Cisco bought this company a few years back. And what this does is it not only will do multi-factor authentication for just one or two products, but it'll also do various different Windows VPN, whether you're using SSTP, point-to-point tunneling protocol, IKE VPN, L2TP, all those different ones, as well as remote desktop. It'll do two-factor authentication for that as well. And it does the same thing as the Microsoft MFA, except for it does it for a lot more products. So it does cost a few dollars a month per user, but it does protect a lot more products, sends a code to your phone, and you have to enter that before you're allowed onto the network. So definitely good. It's really easy to set up. I have a video for it on my channel. You can check it out. You can also use Azure SSO or Federation Services. Now, Federation Services is being replaced by single sign-on using Azure, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. But what this does for you is it links Azure Active Directory to your on-premises Active Directory. And the good thing about this is it doesn't cost anything. You can set up Azure Active Directory for no charge by going to azure.com. You can also set up things that do cost money, such as virtual machines and storage and things like that. But you don't have to pay for this particular service. Microsoft really wants to increase security in corporate America, or actually all across the entire world. And this is one way to really do it, is by having the Azure single sign-on. If you're using on-premises file sharing, then dynamic content is a great idea. You could also use rights management services, either one of these. And what they do is they're free, they're included in Active Directory, and they give you additional protection by doing more than just using the security tab and the share tab to get access into files. So it also requires additional rights that you have to have before you can gain access to things. And rights management service also can work that way offline as well. So if somebody takes a file offline, they're not going to be able to open it unless they can authenticate to Microsoft's server, Active Directory, whether it's Azure or on premises, which gives you additional security. I don't recommend you use OneDrive, Dropbox, Box, any of those other services on your network. First off, if you're using Dropbox or Box, they're going to be slowing down your network because they're going to be constantly connecting back into the website that you're trying to connect to, such as Box. But it's also going to be searching out for Box and Dropbox applications on everybody else's computer. So I've seen that bring networks down to its knees because of the additional traffic that those things have on there. OneDrive is not so bad in that area, but I don't recommend that you use OneDrive for sensitive file share or any of these other services, because if your computer gets owned, then, such as through email, for instance, then you're going to end up having a hacker with a one-way ticket directly into your network. And so OneDrive will gain access to anybody else's OneDrive that they may have shared with that. So they're going to have access to everybody else's shared files as well. And it doesn't even have to authenticate into the on-premises Active Directory to do it. So if you've got just basic file shares that are not sensitive, fine, use all those services all you want, except for be wary of the slowdown that you might get on your network. But if you have sensitive files, then either use Azure storage or use on-premises file sharing using dynamic content or rights management service to protect those sensitive files. Azure Single Sign-On has replaced previous services such as directory synchronization, things like that. And we've also seen Federation Services being phased out as well. So these are the things that we need to keep up on. We need to make sure that you're on the latest thing that's being updated. So it links Azure Active Directory to your on-premises Active Directory securely. And as I mentioned earlier, there's no charge for that. A lot of people are using remote desktop, and I can tell because as soon as the pandemic hit, I noticed that the traffic to my remote desktop videos on my channel just went through the roof. So remote desktop is fine. It's a secure product, especially if you're using 2012 or newer, because we know 2008 and older had some security issues, and Microsoft did patch them, but there might be other security issues that we're just not aware of. So we want to make sure that we're doing this in the most secure manner. Remote desktop web is a better choice than the full desktop access. So what that means is when you go to remote into a server, for instance, you're going to be remoting into the entire desktop. And that is very difficult to lock down. I've done it in many different cases, and sometimes it takes days to lock down all the different things that you didn't even realize that could be a security issue. So it's difficult to lock down. It's just a big security issue for people remoting in. They could have access to files they shouldn't have access to. I've seen some companies accidentally leave the ability for users to shut down the server. So instead of signing out or logging off, they end up just shutting the whole server down. So there's a lot of different things that could go wrong with the full desktop version of remote desktop. So if you use the web version, it's really cool because it allows you to just give them access to applications that they should have instead of the entire desktop. So there's a link here. I'll put this in the comments section, and you'll be able to click on that, and it shows you how to set up both the full version as well as the web version, so you have an idea of how to do that properly and securely. You also want to use public certificates for remote desktop instead of just self-signed certificates. Self-signed certificates are fine. They are secure, especially if you're the one who has deployed them. However, you're going to see a lot of security issues as far as warnings and things like that from both the operating system and from web browsers, if you're using the web version, if you don't use public certificates. The way around that is to trust it through Active Directory, but not everybody's going to be logged in to Active Directory when they access the website. And so you're going to find that some web browsers just won't let you in at all if you don't have a public verified certificate to get you into it. So definitely recommend that. So if you can get away from the traditional remote desktop, whether it's the web version or the full desktop, your other option is to go with virtual desktops. What virtual desktops does is it allows you to combine remote desktop with virtual machines. And how that secures you is you can create your own bubble by creating a virtual machine for each user. It's very easy to replace in case it gets infected. You can make it so it can't infect anybody else by locking down the communications between those virtual machines, between those users. So when a user logs in using a remote desktop or using the web application, they get their very own Windows 10 or whatever version you're using, virtual desktop that is going to be, like I said, it's its own bubble protected from the rest of the network. Now, it does cost more than session-based. So the previous type, or the traditional type of remote desktop, is called session-based, which basically means everybody's sharing that server. So that is a bit of a security risk. So if one person infects the server, then everybody's session is now infected. So that's how virtual desktops can save you and save your company from getting wiped out. So it does cost more, and you do require a higher end knowledge person on premises. So you want to make sure that you have someone who knows what they're doing and how to configure these and replace them and update them and things like that. Azure Virtual Desktops is a good alternative. Now, I would recommend this for a smaller organization, somebody who doesn't have a high-end IT person who has the kind of knowledge to manage virtual desktops. You don't have a lot of desktops. You don't want to spend the money on buying your own servers and paying for all the licenses for the servers and the desktops. With Azure Virtual Desktops, it works the exact same way as on-premises as far as the user experience goes. But it's a lot easier to manage, but it does cost a lot more as far as per user per month. This is the approximate cost that you see from Microsoft. But you don't have to buy a server. You don't have to buy server licenses. You don't need a high-end IT person. So lots of advantages that make that work for smaller organizations. And another good idea is to use Azure Storage for your backups in addition to your local backup. So you absolutely want to back up locally because restoring is going to be more up to date and quicker in case of a breach. But you can use Azure Storage as an additional backup using a different name and password. So if your local username and password gets breached, then they can't necessarily get into your Azure account, as long as you don't make it in a place where they can get access to it. So the Azure Storage won't be as up to date. It takes longer to bring the data back. There is a monthly fee, but it could save your business. And what's your business worth? Of course, we're all using video conference nowadays, and what I really recommend is you don't use Zoom. Don't use Zoom. Don't use Zoom. Use Teams. Microsoft Teams is fantastic. It has Active Directory authentication that you can use. It has pages and pages of security that you can set up. You can say what users can and can't do. It is, for an IT administrator, this is the way that you want to secure these video conferences because you've got file sharing involved, email involved, all these different things can be involved in a video conference session. It's not just me and you talking to each other through a video. We can now share files and access storage and various different things like that. Teams also has a lot more functionality than Zoom does as well. It can link in your email from Exchange. It can link in to files from various different storage type places like OneDrive and Box and SharePoint and lots of other places as well. WebEx is another good one, very secure. GoToMeeting is a good one as well, very secure. There's many others, but don't use Zoom. Don't use Zoom. Don't use Zoom. Why not use Zoom? Besides being poor security and not having very much functionality or good authentication, Zoom has said, hey, we've increased security. We now have end-to-end encryption. doesn't matter. Don't use it, because it's still too easy to hack. It's still too easy for people to break into, and it's just not a good product. Not only that, it's owned partially by the Chinese, which means that the data is going through partially some of their servers. So they could be easily siphoning off data, and you certainly don't want that to happen. So don't use Zoom. The last thing I want to touch on is training your users. You want to conduct weekly training on security. And that's not a bad idea to tell your users it's time to have training, maybe offer them some sort of an incentive, or make some sort of negative thing happen if they don't show up. You want to do it for email, file shares, social engineering. These are all really important areas. These are really good ideas for you. VPN, how to use it properly, remote desktop, video conferencing, and of course there's lots more depending on your organization and what you have in it. So that is my list of things that you should be looking at for securing your network from your users. It's not always your users. It may be the people that have access or control of your users' computers. Thanks for watching.